Today's topic for HUS 201 is on the supervisory process as well as administrative functions and agency organization. So most of you, I'm going to assume, have had a job of some kind at some point in your life. And in pretty much every job, you have a supervisor. There are some differences between supervision in a lot of job settings versus supervision in a clinical job setting. So for example, I worked in retail for a long time before I started working as a helping professional. When I worked at the Music Den, my supervisor, who was a manager, he created my schedule. He taught me what was expected of me. If I was showing up late or something like that, he would write me up or give me a warning or whatever the case is. He's the person I would talk to if I needed a raise, etc. In the social work setting, or really in any helping profession, your supervisors are going to do all of those things, but in addition to scheduling and training and addressing issues or keeping you accountable, your supervisor also should be really helping you learn about various aspects of the job and helping you reflect on your own experience. What kinds of things are coming up for you when you're talking with clients? How are you navigating decisions that you're making when you're talking with clients? Why are you responding in the way you're responding? A lot of times people feel uncomfortable with the supervisory process, at least at the beginning, and the relationship that you have with your supervisor, whether you're there as an intern or whether you're there as an employee, is going to become a really important relationship in terms of the value you're getting and putting into your job, what you're learning while you're there, your ability to be self-reflective, and really ensuring that your clients are getting the best care possible. So during supervision, you should be having detailed discussions about the work you're doing. You should be prepared to discuss exactly what's happening with your clients. What have you learned? What were some opportunities that you had? Maybe there's an issue that's coming up that you're not sure how to address, but you're going to talk about what it is you are doing. What are you bringing to the table when you're meeting with clients? Why are you doing it? So in addition to trying to figure out how are you helping the clients through your actions, you also want to be taking a look at things that it might be bringing up for you. And this is going to require a lot of self-awareness. It can be difficult for people to hear feedback on their job performance, but it is such a critical part of both personal and professional growth. So there are some dynamics of supervision that your textbook reviewed this week. A professional relationship should be built on mutual trust and respect. So you should trust that your supervisor wants you to learn, wants you to succeed, has your best interests at heart, and hopefully your supervisor is going to trust that you are doing the things that you're saying that you're doing, that you're going to prepare for supervision, that you're going to be there when you're supposed to be there, and hopefully you have a mutual respect for each other. It should be friendly, but it is not friendship, okay? So there's a key difference there. You want to be able to feel comfortable in your supervisor's office, but you shouldn't be going in and be like, oh my gosh, like I had such a wild weekend. I'm really sorry I didn't get to finish that process recording. No, those are things, call up your best friend and say that to them before or after work, but these are not the things that you want to be talking about in supervision. Sometimes in this kind of a setting, because when you're doing work as a counselor or when you're doing work where you're working with other people, you're gonna come across issues that are gonna come up for you. You might be talking to a client who shares an experience that's very similar to something that you went through, and it's okay to talk about those things in supervision. But remember that your supervisor is not your therapist, so you want to find a delicate balance, right, of what you're going to share with your supervisor and what you're not going to share with your supervisor. You should be able to share anything that happened with your client and the things that it brought up for you and be able to work through those things, but you don't want to turn it into a therapy session. Your supervisor should not be the first person you call when you're experiencing a personal crisis, unless that personal crisis is preventing you from getting to work that day. So for example, you get a flat tire on your way to work, you're going to be at least a half an hour late. Yeah, your supervisor is the first person you should call. You have a fight with your significant other on your way out the door. you need to figure out how to work through those things yourself. And you can call your best friend on your way to work, or your sister or your mom or whoever it is that you confide in. But those things shouldn't be going directly to your supervisor, because part of self-awareness and emotional competence, which are both required to be really good within the helping professions, are being aware of what's happening with you and being able to navigate your own stuff and not bring your stuff into work with you. I think it's also important that you be aware that your supervisor is responsible to the agency as well as for those that they are supervising. So there's something called vicarious liability, which means that if your supervisor is an LMSW and you're a social work intern, and that they're really ultimately responsible for the work that you're doing. And so they're kind of going to have to sign off on it. So they're going to want to make sure that you're doing quality work. And that's an important thing for you to be aware of every time you sign your name to something, that you're not only signing your own name, you're essentially signing your supervisor's name, and you're representing the agency, and you're also representing the college. So keep those things in mind, because that's important, and hopefully it will motivate you to make sure you're doing the best that you can. Keep in mind also that your supervisor possesses knowledge and experience. There's a reason that they were chosen to be your supervisor. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to agree with everything they say. Maybe you won't understand why they're doing something, or maybe you feel like, you know what, I would do this completely differently. There's a reason that they're doing what they're doing. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's 100% right. I've had experiences where I've disagreed with supervisors in the past. And when I was an intern, I didn't say much about it. When I got, when I was working with people for a long time and I got steadily promoted, I was more able to speak up and say to my supervisor, can you explain to me how you came to that choice? But you need to make sure that when you question your supervisor, it's coming from a place of you wanting to understand, and not a place of, attacking, like, why would you do that? I never would have done that. They've been there for a long time, most of the time. In order to be able to supervise you, they've probably been there for a while, which means they have experience with this population. They understand how the agency works. So you want to try to figure out where they're coming from and try to soak up as much as you can. And also keep in mind that supervisors are human. So it is possible that they made a mistake. It is possible that they misread something or misheard something, or there was a miscommunication. Try not to get super defensive when those things happen. Just make sure that you're presenting everything the best way that you can. And if you're having a problem, keep me in the loop. And for those of you, I know a lot of you are not interning right now. I think this is still an important lesson, because hopefully some of you, I think, are already working in the helping profession, so this should apply to that as well. And if you're not right now, then you will be in the future. So I'm hopeful that you'll still find this a useful discussion. So this just talks about some various functions of supervision, especially for those of you who are talking about a supervisor who's your internship supervisor, right? So we have administrative, which is the implementation of policy and procedure, making sure you're following the rules, making sure you're filling out all the forms that you're supposed to be filling out, that you're correctly utilizing the, technology in the office. Are things to wonder about. Are you allowed to write a letter from the agency, or does anything that gets written need to be reviewed by your supervisor before it gets sent out? Do you know how much time you need to put in to request time off? Do you know, like, whether or not you have to take a lunch break? Things like that. And that's to make sure that you're following the rules, right? So that's one of your functions of supervision. Another one is education, right? Your supervisor hopefully is knowledgeable and has positive attitudes and skills, and hopefully is going to help you develop those things. Hopefully you already have a positive attitude, and but your skill set is going to continue to develop throughout your career, not even just during an internship. And the goal there is for you to gain further understanding of your population, of what's going on with you, all of these things, and to further develop your skills. And then there's a supportive aspect as well, right? So a good supervisor should help you stay motivated, should make you want to come to work, should help you feel good about what you're doing, and hopefully help you want to continue doing it. And that should motivate you and improve the morale and satisfaction that you have with your job, so you're not waking up every morning and thinking like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go to work. If you're in a supportive setting, then hopefully, we all have days where it's like not what you feel like doing, but hopefully once you get there, you're happy about being there and you feel good about the work that you're doing. So some expectations that you should have for supervision come with the understanding what your supervisor is responsible for and what you are responsible for. So your supervisor should be reviewing your tasks, so telling you what it is you should be doing. If you are unclear about what it is that is expected of you, it's your job to make sure you're asking questions, right? Your supervisor should be reviewing and evaluating the things that you're doing and giving you feedback. And sometimes that feedback sounds like criticism. And criticism, people think of it as like a dirty word. It's an important part of growing and learning both personally and professionally. So if your supervisor tells you that every single thing is great, and then it comes time for your review at the end of the semester and you're getting 1s instead of 3s on things, that would be very confusing, right? So hopefully your supervisor is going to say to you things like, I feel like this could be worded a little bit differently. So I feel like you need to work on identifying client strengths. I feel like you need to further develop your writing ability, things like that can be helpful. They should be giving you an objective appraisal, which means that even if they really like you, they're still going to give you criticism and constructive feedback sometimes. Or if they don't like you, which hopefully would never be the case, but let's say you just don't really have a great personality match with your supervisor, they should still be able to give you solid feedback that focuses on what it is you're doing instead of, who you are as a person. And they should be educating you and, again, helping you understand why it is that you're doing the things that you're doing. Your responsibilities are to complete the tasks, to ask questions, to be accountable, which means showing up when you're supposed to show up, acknowledging, if you haven't completed something, acknowledging that you haven't completed something and explaining why it's not completed, as opposed to like the dog ate my homework kind of an excuse. And you should be treating your internship as a job. One of the things that's really important for you to be aware of, if you are interning this semester, you're probably going to want your supervisor to write you a recommendation if you're planning on transferring to another school when this is all over. You can also ask a boss if you're working in the field at this time. You can also get recommendations from your professors. I typically write a lot of recommendations each year for my students, but in order to get those good recommendations, you need to make sure that you're taking this experience as a professional and really putting your all into it. Now, when we think about things like that, the other thing is there are so many social workers in Suffolk County and in New York altogether. Like, it's a huge field of helping professionals, but you will find that you're going to come across the same people repeatedly. So you want to make sure that you are behaving as a professional. Obviously, nobody expects you to know everything when you're just starting out in the field. But they do expect you to behave professionally. So even if you do not need this, even if you don't need a letter from this person at the end of the year, you do want to make sure that you're not burning any bridges, that if you run into this person again in the future, that they're going to have positive things to say about you. And keep that in mind also in class and in your discussion board posts. The people that are in your program right now here at Suffolk are your future colleagues, right? So you could be running into the same people that are in your classes for years to come throughout your career. So you want to make sure that you're building relationships that are going to become part of your professional network as you move forward. And you can definitely do that by taking your coursework seriously as well as your internship. So in terms of getting the most from supervision, whether you're working in the fields or whether you're interning or at some point in the future, you should expect to have regular meetings with your supervisor, hopefully an hour a week. During those meetings, you should ask for help. You do not want to go in and pretend you know things that you don't know, pretend you understand things that you don't understand yet. And again, nobody expects you to be an expert at this phase. So make sure you're asking for help and ask specific questions. You want to be prepared. If you're expected to write process recordings, you should have them done before you go to supervision. And hopefully your supervisor is going to review them with you because that's an important part of that process. Write down your questions or concerns before your meeting, because if you're like me, you have a bunch of questions and then if you don't write them down, you get into the meeting and you sit down and you're like, oh, there was something I wanted to ask you, but I don't remember what it was. You want to make good use of the time, right? So you can do that by writing things down in advance. Ask them for feedback, especially if you feel like not everybody is comfortable giving feedback. So think about times you've worked in groups with classmates in other classes. I'm sure there have been times that a professor or teacher has said to you, talk for 5 minutes and then give each other feedback on what you said. Nobody likes to point out other people's shortcomings, right? It's a difficult role to get into as a supervisor. And one of the things that happens typically in this field is people get promoted to become supervisors because they're really good at their job, which is awesome, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're really good at being supervisors. So keep that in mind also, and just try to be patient. They're humans also, but it's easier for people to give feedback if you ask them for feedback. So questions like, do you think there's anything I can be doing differently? Or do you think there are things that I can do better? Are there areas you want me to grow in? Are there things you think I should be exploring? It's easier for people to give feedback when they know you're open to feedback. So especially if you're not getting it right away, it's important to ask for it. But also be open to hearing feedback. Try not to be defensive. And even if it's delivered well, sometimes people still kind of feel like, like nobody wants to feel like they're not doing a good job. But just because there are other ways that you could go about something doesn't mean that the way that you did it was awful. The important thing is you are there to learn, right? And you're only going to get better as you practice and as you get that feedback. Also, make sure you are assertive and respectful. So if you feel like you're not having enough to do, ask for more things to do. But ask in a respectful way. You don't want to say like, oh my gosh, this is so boring. I thought I was going to be doing so much more stuff. That's not what you want to do. You want to say, I'm really kind of like, I feel like I'm moving through these tasks pretty quickly. Do you have suggestions or things that I want to make sure I'm not missing anything? And if you're not missing anything, like, do you have ideas for what I can do when I have some downtime? Are there other ways for me to get involved? Am I allowed to look through case files? Like, find out how else you can learn if there's not something for you to do every minute of every day that you're there. That's taking initiative. And then understanding how your agency is structured. This is an important part of service delivery to clients, right? So any agency that is employing helping professionals, social workers, potential future social workers, generally they are there to support a client base, right? Or a client population. So when I say client population, I'm talking about either, perhaps the homeless or chronically and severely persistently mental illness, or adolescents who are developing social skills, or who need homework help, right? Every agency, every nonprofit organization has a mission statement. You can find those on the website. You can find them if they have written pamphlets. Pretty much everything is, the mission statement usually is your guiding principle. Who is it that you're trying to help, and how are you trying to help them? What do you believe needs to be done? So that's a really important key factor of any nonprofit organization, any place that you're going to be employed. Who are you trying to serve, and what are you trying to do to serve them? Also, if you're not familiar with the term nonprofit, it means that their budget is set up so that any money coming in is used to provide services and resources. So the money that comes into nonprofits is used to pay a mortgage or pay rent, pay for lighting and electricity, buy computers and a copy machine, and a lot of nonprofits are very old school. A lot of them still use fax machines, even though the rest of the world is scanning things at this point. Also, making sure staff get paid, right? Staff salaries. So that's pretty much the entire operating budget is on making sure that their bills are paid, that their staff salaries are paid, and providing resources to the clients. So it's not typically like a growth industry. You're not going to have nonprofits that are selling stocks on the stock market, and you're not going to have nonprofits where the executive director is getting super rich, right? So where does that money come from? Consider the funding source, right? A lot of times agencies are run through money that comes through the government. So for example, the last organization that I worked for Montfort Therapeutic Residents. They were funded through a combination of state and local funding. So the local DSS office, along with New York State Office of Children and Family Services. So the government has money to provide services to people, and then agencies will write something called a request for a they'll complete something called a request for proposal, where they talk about how they're going to meet that need that the government is asking them to meet, what exactly they're going to do, and then an agency is going to be awarded money through the government, that office of the government that's set aside to provide services like that. Other ways that nonprofits get money is through grants, which can be offered also through the government, or a lot of the time through larger organizations or research organizations. Private donors, so you will get, you'll have fundraisers that work a lot of times at larger nonprofits, who try to, get members of the community to donate money, or sometimes donate services. Or there holds like big fundraising events, where they'll get donations from like people in the community. So like I've had to call like Panera and Subway to ask them to donate sandwiches for a large, golf outing. So things like that, those are all considered part of the funding sources. Sometimes clients pay for services at nonprofit organizations. Most of the time that is not how nonprofits are funded, but it could meet a part of their operating budget is client payment. Okay, so your funding source is important because ultimately your board of directors is going to be responsible to make sure that the funding source is happy so that you continue to get money, so that you can continue to work with your clients. The board of directors is generally made up of volunteers, but it's considered kind of like a prestigious volunteer service. And they're usually people who are considered leaders in their field. So usually people at local businesses, like leaders in local businesses, or lawyers a lot of the time are on boards, things like that. And their board of directors are there to approve operating budgets, and usually to hire at least the executive director of the organization, sometimes other administrative positions as well. And then the executive director of the organization is responsible for answering to the board of directors. What kind of work are you doing? How are you making your funding sources happy? What other options do we have to increase our funding so that we can better serve our clients, right? Then we have agency administrators. So these are people like your executive directors. Large organizations sometimes have a lot of administrators. Small organizations usually don't have so many. I've worked in agencies that were really small, where there was an executive director, then there was a clinical director, and then there was the social workers, basically, and then underneath the social workers there were direct care staff, and then the clients, and that was it. I've also worked for large organizations where we had an executive director, we had a director of operation management, we had a director of a COO, so the director of operations and budgeting and things like that, and that. There was a million different administrators in that agency. But then underneath the administrators, there's the agency staff. So those are the people who you're usually working directly with the clients. So it's important to keep in mind how organizations are set up. This is going to help you when you're thinking about your next written assignment, which is your, oh my gosh, what's it called? Agency profile, right? So when you do your agency profile paper or presentation, you're going to decide which you'd prefer. You're going to choose a social issue that you're interested in, describe the issue and the population that is impacted, and identify social services that are available to assist with this issue. You're going to find an agency that's providing services to that population. I would like for you to interview a worker at that agency. You also want to look at their mission statement. You want to ask about how they're funded. That the reason that this is important is because it really impacts the client, right? Because making sure that we understand who are the administrators in the agency, who is the board of directors in the agency, who is the funding source of the agency. All of these people are in place to try to provide services to the clients, right? But they're also going to be, like, agency staff is going to be limited by what services they are able to give the clients based on what their supervisors or the agency administrators say, and the agency administrators are taking directives specifically from the board of directors as well as the funding sources. So there's all these different pieces that come into play in determining what kind of services are offered to your clients, how those services are offered to your clients, and what you're not able to offer your clients. So these are just things to keep in mind. And then if we were to go backwards for a second and think about supervision again, how do you think your relationship with your supervisor could potentially have an impact on your clients, right? We're thinking about organizational culture here. How do all of these things work together to make sure we're doing the best that we can for our clients? So that's what this week's discussion board is going to be about, is what do you think, right, in terms of is it important for an agency staff to understand how an agency is organized, what the funding source is, what the structure is? How could that potentially impact the clients? So that's what I would like for you to think about this week, and I look forward to reading about it on your discussion board. Please reach out to me with any questions, and I hope to see you soon.